Welcome back to Chain Reaction, the Foreign Policy Research Institute's flagship network of podcast series examining the political, security, economic, and social trends shaping our world. Throughout the year, we'll be talking with experts about developments in Russia's war in Ukraine, the new European security order, defense and geopolitical issues in the Baltic states, as well as current and future national security challenges and opportunities in the technology and space sectors. Join us each month for
Bear Market Brief,
Behind the Front,
Baltic Ways,
Report in Short,
The Ties That Bind, NATO Allies in Action. New episodes are available each week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most streaming services. To be the first to know about new releases, you can subscribe to FPRI's Insights newsletter. That's fprinsights.substack.com, or follow the link available in the description of this episode. Thanks for joining us. This week on Behind the Front.
Hello and welcome. My name is Aaron Stein, President of the Foreign Policy Research Institute. And today I'm talking to Billy Byrne, who is the Director of Strategy at Saildrone. Billy, it's good to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to the listeners for listening. Really looking forward to the conversation.
I have a whole bunch of questions I have lined up for you, but I realized I should probably ask you, and for the listeners in general, what it is that Saildrone does all day.
Sure. Yeah. So Saildrone is the world leader in the manufacturing and deployment of unmanned surface vehicles. So for us, think autonomous boats. In our case, looks more like a sailboat, but functions like a boat and a sailboat. But we have our drones deployed globally. They've been deployed globally now for about a decade. So 2 million miles racked up at sea, 60,000 days. And in particular with the U.S. Navy, who's been our number one customer. We're now into our fifth year of 365-day, 24/7 operations with the U.S. Navy globally. So for a guy that, is a Navy guy, started in the Pentagon and rolled out to commercial industry, it's been a humbling journey for me. And it's something that I really enjoy talking about.
Yeah. I mean, the first question I was going to ask you is, what is the future of unmanned surface combatants? But I guess with 5 years under your belt, you can tell us what the past, present, and future may look like. So maybe you want to start us there.
Yeah, for sure. So, Saildrone started out a long time ago doing ocean science research. So looking at fisheries, looking at hurricanes. And this was in the day and age when Starlink was not existing yet. It was really before unmanned surface vehicles were even a thing. And so Saildrone over the last many, many years has matured a very, very reliable, robust system. Then eventually the Navy saw the solution as a great utility and started using it. But I think maybe to go broader and to kind of talk about unmanned surface vehicles and what their utility are in the context of the Navy, it'd be good maybe just to give kind of a strategic backdrop of where the U.S. Navy is right now, where NATO is, and NATO navies are, and why unmanned surface vehicles are important. So for the U.S., I think, your listeners would know it's been well written about. U.S. tensions with China and PLA Navy continue to rise. And the U.S. is facing this kind of dilemma that the PRC is outbuilding us in terms of ship numbers. And then by, proxy of that, the number of VLS cells or the number of missiles that the U.S. is able to take to a fight with China is quickly being eclipsed by the Chinese Navy. And so I think the administration has done a great job in the last several years, investing incredible amounts of money, really putting the spotlight on shipbuilding. And I think that, there's a realization that despite our investment, which will go to reconstitute our numbers, there is this near-term gap, right? I mean, think about how long it takes to build a ship or a conventional fighter, right? We're talking years before those ships are on the water. And if the intelligence community is correct, we're looking at conflict with China here in the next few years. We need a way to try and shore up those numbers and project meaningful capability forward before those assets start rolling off the line. So, inject unmanned surface vehicles. So I kind of hit pause on the Pacific and just quickly flip over to NATO. NATO, kind of similarly to what the U.S. is looking at with China, has also faced years of underinvestment. And is quickly, clearly with the Russian aggression in Ukraine, has seen that they also need to shore up those capabilities and those numbers. And then again is faced with this dilemma of, despite investment, we're faced with this near-term capability gap. And then I think I'll kind of cap the kind of strategic backdrop with what everyone looks to when we start talking unmanned, which is the Black Sea. And in the Black Sea, we've seen the Ukrainians show really what the value proposition is for unmanned in general, but certainly for unmanned surface vehicles. And that is in a time where a Navy is facing a much larger, more sophisticated, more capable conventional Navy, unmanned surface vehicles provide you the ability to strike that Navy and deliver meaningful effects in lieu of or in lack of other conventional assets. So to kind of sum that up, in the Pacific, you have the U.S. Looking for a near-term capability. You have the same thing in NATO, looking for the ability to deploy meaningful capability forward without conventional assets. In the Black Sea, you have a perfect example with Ukraine of how you can do that using unmanned systems. So that is really driving, I think, the market energy around unmanned surface vehicles is certainly what's driving our direction here at Saildrone.
So you described three very different seas or oceans, right? You're talking about the Pacific, where distances are just so vast. I think it's really hard to actually conceptualize just how big that part of the globe is. What I suspect when you mean by NATO is the Atlantic, right? So maybe the North Atlantic. And then you have the Black Sea. The ocean in general is just a very punishing place. So what may work in the Black Sea, probably doesn't work in the Pacific and may not work in the Atlantic. So how are you thinking about sort of the challenge of saltwater in great distances with how you conceptualize your products?
The ocean is a punishing place, and certainly any sailor knows that. And I think that you also point out something that's really important and doesn't receive a lot of light. And that's that it's not enough just to look at a particular unmanned capability and kind of give a value assessment to it. You need to evaluate that capability in the context of the mission it will be deployed in the theater it will be deployed in, and what the logistics are behind it. So let's take kind of the Black Sea as an example. So the Ukrainians have been, again, very effective in striking a conventional force offshore at distances, let's say within 200 nautical miles. Most of those attacks have emanated or started from the land, right? The Ukrainians fighting off of their home turf. I think when you take that, extrapolate it, and move it over to the Pacific, you see some different challenges. So in the Pacific, as you noted, even from Guam, 750 nautical miles to get to the Philippine Sea. And if you're talking about mainland United States over to the Pacific, we're talking 1,500, if not 2,000 nautical miles. And so really, what's the difference there? It's that unmanned surface vehicles that will be used by the United States Navy in that theater will need to commute to the fight. They'll need to get there. And I think when you look across the landscape of vehicles that are able to do that distance, survive, endure, and then deliver a punch, the list of assets that can meet that criteria is very, very limited. I'd say at Saildrone, to speak to our experience, our vessels have been used in an environmental context through Cat 4 hurricanes, really punishing sea states. They've circumnavigated the Antarctic. We've collected all these data. What has that taught us? Well, it's taught us how to build a vessel and then also how to make it endure. And so if you just think about endurance of anything on the water, there's kind of two primary variables that would tell you what the distance or the endurance is. Number one is the engine. Number two is the fuel tank, right? That's a pretty easy math problem to work out, to figure out how long that vessel will endure for. Saildrone, I think, is the only vessel that I know of, at least at the operational scale we deploy at, that adds a third variable, and that is the wing or the sail. And what that does is not only do you have the diesel power or solar power, you also have the ability to persist without the engine on, to loiter, to navigate to an operational area before you even engage the diesels. And then it also gives you the ability to get home or to continue the fight should you have some sort of mechanical failure, which, as all of us know, the only thing guaranteed with a mechanical system is that at some point it will fail. So I think fundamentally, Saildrone has been the only company and the only vehicle design that has changed that equation and added that other variable. And that's why we think it's a great system and a great capability for a fight in the Pacific.
How does the sail actually function? I know how to sail, and so I imagine it's not made out of nylon because that would cause a lot of maintenance. My guess is it's a bit fancier than the laser I learned on, but I didn't actually sort of put two and two together. How does it actually function in addition to the diesels?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have progressed since the age of sail. That is for certain. It's more akin to an aircraft wing. And the way that it functions is via the autonomy. So we have pilots stationed in multiple different time zones around the world, monitoring the drones and then executing the missions of the partners that we work with, and U.S. Navy, international navies, and then environmental community. And basically what happens is that the pilots are giving waypoints for the vessel in a corridor in which that vessel can transit. And then the autonomy on board is taking into account sea state, winds, currents, and then, of course, the track. And it is deciding on its own how to tack and jab and move through the water, just like you and I would do in any other sailboat. This is doing it completely autonomously and can even do it in a fully comms denied environment. So it really is a unique and robust platform in that regard.
And forgive me, are the people that are in the loop here more or less for safety and as a measure of regulatory function, or because they're absolutely mission critical for getting these things from one point to the other, or a little bit of both?
I would say it's a little bit of both, but in terms of the autonomy, the nice thing is that, we could have one pilot at any given time maneuvering or overwatching 10 vessels, 20 vessels, 30 vessels. It scales very easily because of the ease in which the vessels maneuver themselves. Really, they're in the loop because they're tied in with our customer in the end state, those receiving the data. And it's their job to make sure that that data continues to stream and lands in a manner and a mechanism that is useful for the OS2 or the young lieutenant on the other end of the stream, so that that data can then inform operations and give mission commanders the ability to act.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a minute to tell you all about a publication we launched at FPRI called Behind the Front. Behind the Front is where we at FPRI will analyze current and future national security challenges to the United States with a specific focus on the defense industrial base, fixing our broken military procurement system, and the challenges and opportunities in technology and from the emerging space sector. Check it out at behindthefront.substack.com. And now back to our conversation. So let's talk about sort of the practical military capabilities here. Were the original designs, well, I guess the original designs maybe didn't have military functions in mind at all, or if they did, they were secondary to perhaps environmental things. And like many companies, the military is a very large customer, and so there's interest in tapping that market. But maybe walk us through the initial concept for military use, and then your recent agreement, I think with Lockheed, to put missiles on these boats, or at least BLS tubes on these boats to arm them.
Yeah, kind of working in the hurricane and kind of ocean research sphere, again, taught us reliability, taught us endurance, taught us how to be a vessel in really harsh environments and doing a very demanding mission. I think then later on is actually while I was still working in the Pentagon under Admiral Gilday, there's a realization out in Task Force 59 that you had which is the Fifth Fleet for those listening out in the Middle East. There's a realization that conventional assets had left that theater and gone over to the Pacific, meaning that U.S. ships were taken out because of an emerging Chinese threat and moved over to the Pacific. And what you were left with was a massive body of water that was unsurveilled, and really, what you can't see, you can't act on. And so Admiral Cooper, who was in theater at the time, and to his credit, I think really pushed, or has pushed, the U.S. Navy's use of unmanned systems in general, saw that you could use a system like a Saildrone, one that is capable of 100 plus day missions with 80% plus reliability. You can put that system out there with very, very little human oversight, very little impact on manpower. And that system could see, take data, use algorithms to classify targets, and then report it back to an operations center. And what that gave you is the ability to have a full operational picture for pennies on the dollar relative to conventional assets. That was back in 2021. That's since scaled now down to the Fourth Fleet, where dozens of assets are deployed, still in Fifth Fleet, and then, of course, working with our international customers. So that was kind of the initial uptake of Saildrone working with navies. Now, as you mentioned, what's been really exciting for me is partnership with Lockheed. And I think that partnership speaks to kind of the next evolution of Saildrone. And it also speaks to how the company will continue to answer the emerging requirements of our customer, the U.S. Navy. So I think basically, what the vision here is that you have the world leader in endurance, the world leader in autonomous systems, Saildrone, now operationalized with Fourth Fleet and Fifth Fleet, years and years of experience. Now the next step is seeing targets and then providing an opportunity or the ability for a commander to strike targets or to provide defense for conventional assets, whether it be UAV defense or doing point defense for an asset like a DDG in a pretty contested area. That is what we're pursuing now with Lockheed. It's a best of breed approach. They're really impressive folks that we've been working with, and it's been really exciting for me.
I tend to come more from things that fly rather than things that float. But the trajectory that you're talking about here reminds me a lot about unmanned aircraft, which is that the capabilities that they provided proved themselves. There was a demand signal, in this case, the war on terror. And then people were like, why don't we close the loop? I.e., in that if you have a sensor that can see something, put a missile on that sensor carrying platform so that you can respond quickly to, crises or events. Is that the same sort of logic that's driving at least initial operating concepts or thoughts about how these things would be used with missiles on board? Or was it more like we need affordable, scalable ways to get more VLS tubes into the fleet to stay ahead of China, or a combination of the both?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a combination of the both. And maybe let me start with the latter. And really, I think that this is an important point, again, going back to this kind of comparison of the Pacific, NATO, and the Atlantic, and the Black Sea. I think one of the primary differences from the Black Sea to the Pacific is that a fight in the Pacific will likely need capability that is, let's say, an increase in capability from what we've seen in the Black Sea. And by that, I mean, I think that it's going to look more like conventional missiles and conventional means of electronic warfare going up a very robust adversary. Something that I look to that was maybe a competing narrative to what we've been seeing in the Black Sea is really in the Red Sea, where the U.S. has been going up against Houthi forces. And in that scenario, I think differently from the Black Sea, what you see is a conventional force that's gone up against hundreds of asymmetric threats, whether it be Shahed drones, ballistic missiles, anti-ship missiles, and you have a conventional force that is dominated in that regard. So what does that tell you, or what does it tell me? I think what it means is that what we've seen in the Black Sea has solidified this kind of cost curve, or the overall narrative that you can defeat a conventional force with unmanned drones and asymmetric capabilities. I think what it really does show, though, is that the punch that you deliver or the capability that you bring to that theater needs to be capable of actually landing the effect. And so to kind of get back to your question with Lockheed, what we see is that conventional missile systems will continue to be looked to in the preferred method of strike against some of these conventional assets that we might go up against in the future. Saildrone, being the world leader in endurance, having the proven ability to persist in a theater, comms denied environment, we think for the customer will end up being the preferred choice for delivering that capability to theater.
And do you guys envision or I guess this would be the Navy, you'd be responding to a requirement, but of course you could make gentle suggestions about like a high-low mix, because I can imagine once you start putting a bunch of the really fancy stuff onto a basic, let's say, Saildrone model, it no longer becomes a basic model. It gets more expensive. And so some of those cost curve things, no matter how you calculate them, somebody will start asking those questions. So is there like a vision in terms of how you would stagger these things or future operating concepts, to make sort of, let's say, the Houthi fight even more affordable?
Yeah. And again, I think that's a key aspect is that for each mission in each environment, there will be a different, let's say, choice or decision about what systems need to be deployed to meet whatever that threat might be. So let's take, Taiwan, right? Because we're talking about the Pacific. I think, clearly the most catastrophic scenario in the Pacific would be an amphibious invasion of Taiwan. And that is what Hellscape, Replicator, a lot of other initiatives have focused on. I would say that that's not the only scenario, though, and it might not even be the most probable. Not to say that we shouldn't be, let's say, preparing for that, but absolutely there are other possibilities. So, putting on my strategy hat, when I look at Taiwan, I see an entity that imports 98% of its energy needs, exports 90% of the world's chips and 60% of the world's semiconductors. What I see is an entity that may be susceptible to economic coercion via blockade, other means that are, let's say, subkinetic, right? So getting back to your point, in a protracted gray zone conflict in which coercion, blockade, things of that nature may be the preferred choice of our adversary, what drones do we need in that scenario? I think probably not drones with a limited range of 300 or 400 miles. I think you need drones that can persist for months, if not years at a time. Drones that can be there surveilling undersea infrastructure, mapping the seafloor, kind of tracking threats, and then making sense of that environment. And so it really is a choice, I think, dependent on what the particular situation is. And Saildrone certainly has many capabilities that lends itself to all of the above.
With that persistence, I do imagine that one of the main challenges that will actually be faced is not necessarily from the drone itself, but from the things on the drone that are susceptible to saltwater corrosion. Like a hub and spoke approach, to thinking about future deployment models, where they can loiter, they can spend a long time away, let's say from the harbor or the base, but they'll have to come home at some point, in order for, I guess, diagnostics and sort of sensor checks, rather than necessarily swapping out the crew.
And again, here with Saildrone, I think this is a key utility for the wing, right? So most drones are limited again by that fuel tank, right? If the engine's not on, if the generator's not churning, then the drone is ineffective. Not so with Saildrone, and that really is a key patent of the technology. And I would say to your point about saltwater corrosion, the punishing kind of nature of the maritime, I think when you start thinking about deploying more sensitive payloads and systems, right, that kind of corrosion factor or that risk of having a mechanical failure becomes immense. And my question is, what onboard vessels gives you the confidence that they will be able to get home should you have that mechanical failure? And again, I think this goes back to the third variable that Saildrone brings to the table, and that is the ability to say, in the event of mechanical failure, or in the event that you want to run the fuel tank all the way to bingo in an operational environment, we will give you the ability to get that payload home. And I think that is extremely, extremely unique, and it's something that shouldn't be overlooked.
So we're coming to the end here, and there's this tendency, particularly when you're talking about unmanned systems, to sort of talk about the future. Everything's going to be changing in the future. The future of warfare is changing. People perhaps overlearning the lessons from videos they watch about Ukraine or Nagorno-Karabakh or Syria, sort of choose your own example. But you're in this business on a day-to-day basis, and the Navy is actively looking and perhaps struggling to increase the amount of ships that the U.S. can build and sustain per year. There is clearly a lane for these types of products or platforms. So what is the future? As you think about this, what are the opportunities that are perhaps on offer?
I think it's that cost curve, right? It's what the Ukrainians have demonstrated. It's the ability to field a system rapidly, field a system that's capable, and field a system that's capable to get that firepower downrange when and where you need it. And for me, I think kind of the three, let's say, values that will be most applicable in the future for these systems are 1, endurance, 2, survivability, and 3, punch. You need to be able to endure the distance, right? You need to actually make it into theater. You need to survive once you're in theater. And that's more than just protecting the asset from incoming threats. It's the reliability of the system, right? It's the ability to function in those punishing environments that you articulated. And then the third thing is to deliver a punch that is meaningful, right? And that, again, back to our conversation, depends on what that adversary is, who the adversary is. Do you have a punch that will actually land and deliver that cost curve that we've been discussing? I'd say Saildrone's delivering all three. Endurance, clearly world leader. Survivability is something that we've been working on for a very long time in the form of reliability. And then finally, punch. And that is what this partnership with Lockheed represents for us. It's something that we'll be moving towards. And we hope it'll be a good asset for the U.S. Navy and international navies going into the future.
Is there anything that we should be on the lookout here? People listening to the podcast who get interested and want to find some news. I mean, when I reached out to you to do this podcast, I didn't know that you guys were on the precipice or perhaps already had signed an agreement with Lockheed to talk about missiles. So we're going to get a test or something we can all look forward to?
Well, I will tell you that there are very interesting times ahead for Saildrone. I am certainly excited. I think maybe the teaser I'd leave you with is that Saildrone has shown over the years that the technology scales, and the bigger it gets, the better it gets. And so I'd stay tuned here in the near future to see what we have rolling out. But certainly an exciting time. I'm excited to be working here and partnering with the Navy. And again, thank you and your listeners for listening. And it's been a great discussion here.
Yeah, well, thanks, man. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Behind the Front, a special series of the Chain Reaction podcast at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. To learn more about this and many other initiatives, please visit us at fpr.org. Until next time.